Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the EUPRERA Talks. My name is Anca Anton. I'm the EUPRERA Director of Public Relations and Administration, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. For those of you who are joining us maybe for the first time or don't know a lot about EUPRERA, we are the European Public Relations Research and Education Association, and we have a presence across Europe. We have about 550 members, mostly academics, but also professionals from about 50 countries, mostly in Europe, but also outside of the continent. If you are interested in research or educational activities, one of the core activities of EUPRERA is carried out in its thematic networks, which are networks of researchers, both from academia and from the profession, from the industry, exploring various topics depending on their interests. But also lately we've been going a lot into more education related and pedagogy related activities and topics. And of course, one of our core events is the EUPRERA Congress, which takes place annually in September. This year, the Congress will take place in Bucharest, in Romania, on the topic of technology, AI, emerging technological environments. Next year, it will be in Lund, in Sweden. For the topic for the theme of the Congress, you'll need to stay tuned to EUPRERA. So that being said, today we are having a very interesting webinar on a very timely topic. This webinar is emerging from one of the networks, the thematic networks of EUPRERA, which is the education network, and from the work that some of the members of the network have been doing. That being said, I am giving the floor to the moderator for today, Dr. Raluca Moise, to tell you a little bit more about the webinar, the structure, and of course, our speakers. Raluca, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anca. First of all, I would like to open today's webinar with a warm welcome to everyone from panelists, colleagues, and interested audiences. I think that the need for such a webinar comes from two types of dynamics which are interconnected: the reconfiguration of public relations degrees and the increased interest in researching the educational institutionalization of public relations. So we have seen across the UK, the higher education provision in public relations is definitely going through important changes. Some reports and some research reports have flagged shutdowns of single honours degrees in the UK, or changes through curricular redesign. Given institutional considerations such as the decrease of student numbers in PR or communications UG degrees, or lack of resources across the sector. However, at the same time, the communications and PR industry is a constant large contributor to the national and global economies, as some of our panelists today actually have written about extensively and have researched about. So I invited today to discuss this discrepancy from different perspectives, experts in the field of PR higher education. And we will start the webinar with two presentations. First of all, Richard Bailey, who is a public relations educator and editor. He's a senior lecturer in public relations at Leeds Beckett University, and he's also the editor of PR Academy's PR Place Insights. So Richard will kick off our webinar with a presentation highlighting some of the key findings of the research report he co-authored with Kevin Ruck. And the research report was titled Public Relations Education, Training and Accreditation Research Report. Secondly, the second presentation, or the second presentation with some key highlights and some key findings, will be given by Dr. Michal Chmiel, Senior Lecturer at Royal Holloway, researcher in the intersections between psychology and public relations, but also former course leader at LCC BA PR course. Michal will present some key findings of the paper that we co-authored on the struggles and challenges with which PR education maybe is confronted today. So these presentations will be then followed by a conversation with Monique Abbenbroek, coordinator EUPRERA network on PR education, one of the co-coordinators with Anka as well. Professor Ralph Tench, professor and scholar in PR and strategic communication, many contributions, of course, to public relations education, but also having represented EUPRERA in the board of the Commission on Public Relations Education. Stephen Waddington, the founder and managing partner of WADS Inc., PhD researcher at Leeds Business School, but also honorary fellow of CIPR, and more importantly, maybe today, former president of Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the UK. So we hope this conversation will be engaging and will stir many questions. So I'd like to give the floor to Richard to open today's webinar and discussions with his presentation.
Thank you. Let me say up front, we do have a problem with public relations education. And I will come on to talk about that and show you some of the data around that. But we don't only have a problem with public relations education. Indeed, we have two larger, even existential crises facing the sector in the UK that I need to speak about first. I need to mention first, one of them I'm not even going to speak about in any detail. The first is a funding crisis. There will be departments closing, there will be courses closing, there will be lecturers made redundant because of the current funding crisis. So even before we talk about our particular parochial problem of public relations degrees, we're not going back to the past. We're not going to be reopening courses. We're not going to be reliving the experience we've been through. We have to start with that reality. And the second one, the second existential crisis, you may struggle to read this, but I really want to highlight a report from a UK government department late last year, Department for Education, talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on UK jobs and training. On the left of the screen are those occupations most affected by AI, large language models. And on the right are those occupations least affected. And you may be squinting to read it, but essentially there's a really clear divide. On the left are graduate level occupations that we used to call white collar. And I've highlighted public relations professionals is there within the top 10. Beneath solicitors and psychologists and FE teaching professions, but up there in the top 10. And on the right, we have sports players. AI is not going to replace, name your favorite Premier League footballer, Harry Kane or whoever, all right? Roofers, plasterers. So when we think back to the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, the roles most affected by industrialization were laboring roles, blue-collar roles, working roles. When we think of the AI revolution that we're just at the beginning of, it's white-collar roles, it's graduate-level roles, it's professional roles. Now, to be clear, the report doesn't say these jobs are going to be replaced by AI. It merely says they're going to be affected by AI. So we are still in that optimistic early stage where we can believe AI can be a positive force. So Stephen, on behalf of your CIPR AI in PR panel, thank you for the good work you have done. But let me whistle blow on the conversations, the only conversations I ever hear colleagues within a university having about AI. They're not optimistic conversations about the potential for huge problem solving and dealing with wicked problems. They are conversations about the problem of plagiarism. It's depressing, all right? AI is seen within mainstream higher education as a plagiarism problem, just as Wikipedia was 2 decades ago. Very depressing. Because my question there is, what is university for? Is university for policing assignments? I mean, no, it's not. It has to be for something else. So there are concerns about whether our education is fit for purpose. And just to be provocative, I'm going to move on and throw out some paradoxes and propositions. I'm going to throw these out and they're going to offend people, but this is my intention, to try to spark some thought as I start this process. The problem with undergraduate education, and I'm not anti the marketization in principle, but in practice what's happened is the more students have got into debt over their degrees, the less risk they are willing to take within their degree. And so we have to offer a low-risk education, a fail-safe education, to ensure that students don't fail assignments. So rather than upping the game, rather than being fit for purpose for this new world of AI, we're retreating into quite a comfort zone within education. More broadly, we're talking about public relations education. And here's a paradox. Isn't public relations, isn't communication easy in theory? Which is why sometimes it's hard to teach, because students can't see what's the problem. What's so hard about that? It's only hard in practice. And moving on from that proposition is the fact that, we are facing a crisis of public relations education, and yet we are in an age of flourishing public relations scholarship. So that's a paradox that is hard to explain. Plenty of people are producing research papers and writing books, but who's reading them? I fear the gap is widening between practitioners and academics. And of course, we have a three-legged stool of research. We want people who are teaching what a subject they know about from experience, as well as having researched. And we also need a feedback loop from students. We need to learn from those that we're teaching. Just to give a nod to Ralph, I listened into your chat. What a wonderful chat with, you were being interviewed by one of the first students you ever taught, Dom Birch, at Leeds Beckett University. That's my point about the paradox. 20 years ago, 30 years ago indeed, you could be way more challenging in the classroom because it was a low-risk degree to be taking. When there were virtually no fees back then in the 1990s. I think things have changed. So this is where I end. I wasn't keeping an eye on time, so someone tell me to shut up. But this is 10 years worth of, if you like, data. This was a project I ran almost single-handed, though I've had some support in it latterly from PR Academy. Thank you. But I ran this for most of the time single-handed, and what I was trying to do was to encourage undergraduate or public relations students in the UK to share content, to build their networks, and therefore to develop their careers. 2 case studies. Bethany Goff, our joint winner in 2022. We had a little celebratory event at the end of the year, and I learned 2 things from Bethany at that event. This was just 2 years ago, 2022. Thing number 1 is she'd been offered a graduate level position by a high-flying digital PR agency called Batten Hall in London. She'd been offered that position. They said, why don't you apply to us? Because they'd already heard about her, because she was the leader in my contest. She's still working there. Second thing I learned from Bethany at that session is that would be the last PR student from Solent University that I would ever encounter, because she was the last ever intake. The course closed on a high, but it closed. Look at my list. Over 10 years, Solent was the one university to have won 3 times, and it's now closed down. There are no more PR students at Solent. There is an MA run alongside the Institute of Internal Communication. But that aside, there are no public relations students, BA or MA, at Solent. That knocks out 3 of my 10 years. There was, or there will be, no winner in 2024. This is also really, really opposite. This was a 10-year rise and fall. I'm not running the contest anymore. Why? Because there is not the talent pool or the enthusiasm, because again, because of the perverse incentives in higher education. If you charge higher fees, students will only focus on assignments. They won't focus on extracurricular activities that can do them good, because they're not being assessed on it. They're not going to be graded on it, so they don't feel incentivized. So this contest diminished over time, and we're not running it this year because there just isn't the intake. Perhaps don't have time to talk about Orla, our star winner who won twice, but I'm going to run you now through the names of these universities. Sunderland has won twice. Sunderland no longer has BA students. They were both BA students. Sunderland's closed the course. Solent's closed its course. Bournemouth, a one-time winner, one of the original BA undergraduate programs alongside ours at Leeds Beckett University, Leeds Polytechnic, Leeds Metropolitan previously. Bournemouth no longer has single honours public relations. Liverpool John Moores no longer has single honours public relations. And Leeds Beckett, we never had an undergraduate winner, but Leeds Beckett no longer has a single honours. We're no longer recruited on single honours BA public relations. I've got a list of 12 other names of UK universities that once ran single honours BA public relations programmes, but no longer do. Central Lancashire, Edge Hill, Falmouth, Gloucestershire, Greenwich, College of Mark and St John, Marjon, Lincoln, Manchester Metropolitan, Robert Gordon University, Teesside, and Westminster. So, you know, that's a pretty conclusive picture. There are things we could pick up and be optimistic about, but single honours, BA public relations, it's had a rise and it's had a fall, and it's nearly extinct. But for the two on the list, LCC, London College of Communication, and Ulster University are the two that you can apply for today to study single honours public relations. We're not going back for reasons I've explained, but we can still mourn the loss and celebrate some wonderful students. And I've got some names of some of them on my list there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Well, on that note, I think this transition is very welcome because, Richard, your co-authored report and basically your narrative about the rise and fall of public relations undergraduate degree courses has been met with, let's say, different voices and different perspectives, which I think it's always good to have a conversational debate and different perspectives. Heather Heasley was writing in an interview on PR Moment that this kind of narrative needs further investigation and, exactly as you said, and we are doing today, a little bit, maybe depth and exploration from different perspectives, which of course you already opened many pathways of conversation today. So I'd like to let my colleague, Dr. Michal Chmiel, with whom I recently published this paper on PR education for Vadis. And I would let Michal to talk more about the paper's aims and some of the key findings, which I think very much in conjunction and very complementary to what you just presented now.
Thank you, Raluca, and thank you, Richard. Definitely, I would like to echo what Richard has said, that the picture is not very optimistic and there is no way of going back, but potentially there's a way of going forward if we understand the situation better. And I would like to start with what I would say is a key message of our work with Dr. Moyes, that is, especially for educators, offering education that is relevant, practical, and is a good value for money is a question of responsibility, and as such is also a question of sustainability, because providing good education is a way forward for the society. So about our finding is about public relations and about undergraduate public relations education in the UK. What we found is that obviously public relations is, as a discipline, is multi-paradigmatic in its nature. There are many intersections with different disciplines, but there are also different perspectives and different points of view represented. And this is something which may be perceived as a source of challenge, as a source of enthusiasm, but also comes with its own problems. As many practitioners, educators, and also students may notice, there is a huge asymmetry between how the word public relations is used, between its reputation, and between what it can actually do positively. Arguably, PR has a very positive role in today's society, and as a field, it has a very mature nature. But despite this maturity, there are some conflicting representations, and those conflicting representations comes from misperceptions of public relations, but they also come from those different paradigms represented in the scholarship of public relations. So what we wanted to do with Dr. Moyes, we wanted to first deconstruct the field and understand better what is going on, and then offer some kind of a way forward in terms of how to educate in the UK, but also in Europe. Publics can hold different perception of public relations. They are often vague. Not all of them are positive. But as an occupational field, it's on the growth. There are estimates that it could be worth up to $150 billion in the United States. But even this number can be slightly underestimated because there are no good there is no good data about the actual numbers of people working in public relations, which may be partly connected to different labels assigned to public relations practice. So there is huge growth, and there are several characteristics of this growth that kind of complement the theoretical expansion of the field. And two levels we have identified is the integration on the level of content and the integration of strategy. Especially the first level, the level of content, has been interesting because the role of content has been emphasized by many practitioners. Everyone nowadays wants to produce content, and producing content has been one of the key functions and key jobs for every entry-level jobs in public relations industry. Since its beginnings, public relations has been thought as a mass communication practice largely informed by psychology and intended to change how people think about products, issues, ideologies, problems, and conflicts between countries. So there's been this functional perspective in public relations, but in PR scholarship, the agenda advanced by critical scholars showed also negative impact of public relations, and especially researchers from adjacent fields showed that public relations is not a force for good at all times, and identified many problems with the influence, the negative influence that PR public relations can exert on the society. So there have been a number of tensions in the field, within the field, but there have been also tensions between practitioners and academics. One of the problems with practicing public relations is its invisible nature, and this invisibility may be partly associated with this negative, unethical influence that PR might exert. So even though people today are practicing public relations, not at all time their roles are defined as being in PR. One of the problems, partly related to content and the emphasis on producing content, is the apparent convergence on the level of communication practices. And it has partly translated, as I'm going to discuss later in my very brief presentation, is this convergence has translated into how different PR degree names are called. And partly to what Richard Bailey said, now single honors degrees are disappearing, and in their place, PR degrees are combined with different media, communication, and journalism degrees, potentially to make them more attractive for students. Now, globally, PR degrees attract a very good number of students, especially as many public relations firms and in-house departments demand more skilled candidates. However, this interest and the need for skilled and prepared candidates does not resonate or is not visible in the UK undergraduate public relations education landscape. We find one of the reasons behind this is lack of dialogue between key stakeholders, that is students, employers, and universities. One might argue that all triads are unstable, but maybe this is a way forward for public relations, a discipline inherently built on building relationships. So maybe one of the ways of understanding the situation and responding to the current crisis is building better understanding and partnerships between students and their needs, employers, the industry, widely defined, as well as universities. Especially students nowadays are important because the new Gen Z generation has somewhat different expectations, different needs, and partly in understanding the characteristics of Gen Z reveals why currently there are so few single honors public relations degrees. Now, one of the things that may explain why those single honors degrees are disappearing is the question, what should be taught in a PR degree? What kind of skill set should be delivered? Now, there is a wide inconsistency about what to expect from a good public relations degree. And those expectations are informed by current and past experience of current public relations practitioners and employers, but also by academics teaching on those degrees. The main point of contention is essentially whether we should teach practical skills or equip candidates with more general skill set that would enable them respond to new challenges, those challenges that are not yet have been adequately defined. Almost anecdotally, on the UK government's National Careers Office website, the advice for one that wants to become a PR practitioner is to complete a foundation certificate in marketing and not to go to any of the existing undergraduate courses. So with this lack of definition of public relations, with multiplicity of definitions of public relations, comes this sort of dilution of public relations degrees. It's probably because of those who are responsible for promoting those degrees want to attract higher number of students, which partly reflects one of the key characteristics of Gen Z, who want to find a more general knowledge, more undergraduate experience that would open them for a number of different jobs rather than specialize in one specific job. This may come with as a result of certain anxiety of not committing at an early age for one specific career path and career role. So nowadays, I think that the two biggest challenges are audiences and Gen Z students, and we need to understand what are those characteristics that audiences, and we need to understand what are characteristics of Gen Z students, and we need to use this information to inform decisions about the degrees. To conclude, the final points in our paper were about to developing more adequate pedagogy in public relations degrees, which would be less focused on teaching practical skill set and more on developing certain more general skills, like, for example, creative thinking, problem solving, group work, working under stress, working under different conditions. And this obviously calls for more pedagogy-focused research, while we can safely say that public relations scholarship is quite mature, and there are, well, as Richard said, a number of papers and books published almost every month. Most of this research is not about peer pedagogy, and this is why I think, speaking for myself, academia needs to do a much better job to develop pedagogies that will equip students for the challenges that have not yet been defined. The challenges of EDI, the challenges of the changing audiences, the challenges of the Gen Z, because most definitely without revisiting how we teach and what is the content of curricula, we won't be able to competitively and responsibly prepare students for those next challenges.
Thank you so much, Michal. A lot to take in, I suppose. My opening question for everybody will be basically drawn from both interventions. Quite interesting, and a lot of dimensions covered here. So I would like to start with your statement, Stephen, on today's post on LinkedIn. Fundamentally, the UK market doesn't value public relations degrees. So my question, in the light of everything that has been presented so far and your very interesting statement as well, the question is this debate between specialist knowledge versus generalist knowledge, right, as a ticket of entry on the job market and in the industry. But it has always been there when it comes to public relations. We've had this debate and we heard these conversations many times. Now, my question for today's panelists is about if you have noticed any recent dynamics or changes in the way that PPR degrees are today valued in comparison with broader degrees, such as media and communications that might include PR modules, and even generalist type of knowledge, which comes, more from humanities and social sciences, but also addressing any other aspects. I mean, Richard, you talked about students not being any more enthusiastic about public relations, and not having, building a talent pool through the university, and that they don't feel any more incentivized. So yeah, I think I'll just leave the floor to inviting first Professor Ralph Tench to address this question from his own perspective, and then following with Stephen and Monique. Sorry, Ralph, can't hear you. Thank you. No, I think you have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay. Shall we start maybe with Stephen until, yeah, okay. So we'll start with Stephen and then Professor Tench can join us.
So I have to say, this is I find this whole discussion really reductive and frankly a little bit depressing, because there has never been such a need for the skills that public relations practitioners have, certainly at a management level. And let's not get into the. I'm going through the existential crisis that all PhD researchers go through at this moment in time, where I've sort of deconstructed practice to such a point that I actually hate myself and hate the discipline that I've been working in for 30 years. But it has been very good to me. I've built 3 successful businesses around a public relations proposition. I've hired lots and lots of practitioners, and practice has never been more valuable, because of issues related to misinformation, because of issues related to polarization, because of issues related to ESG. And ultimately, some of the challenges that we're helping address could lead to the reappraisal of economic systems and, the future sustainability of society. So, absolutely, we're
fundamental. There's a disconnect though, and it's a market disconnect, I think. You know, and I don't think it relates purely to public relations education. I think it relates to a lot of the issues, you know, within the discipline in itself, weak boundaries, the poor relationship between theory and practice. I do think there are some challenges with education, though, educational provision. You know, there isn't a barrier to entry to public relations, certainly to practice it in the UK and most European countries. There is no career ladder that's formally accepted. There isn't a competency framework that's formally accepted that you'd see in other professional disciplines. I think those are huge challenges for us when we see the threat of AI, because, you know, we can't clearly define what it is we do, the value that we give to organizations, the value we provide to organizations, how we measure. And so it's hardly surprising that, you know, we don't value the education around public relations, because public relations itself doesn't get the recognition or value it deserves. The general view within in-house and agency roles in the UK, we have a community, variously depending on which number you look at, between 60 and 100,000 practitioners, and it depends how, again, it depends how you define public relations, but, you know, sizable community. The general viewpoint of practice is that we need to hire someone with a general level degree competence, and then we can provide the practical skills that they need, or train them around the practical skills, all the issues that I suggested pertaining there. You know, there's been a number of attempts to look at different interventions. Apprenticeships is the most recent ones. I think that's completely failed. You know, there's 130 to 150 apprenticeship starts in the UK, in England. Sorry, in England, not in the UK. You know, in a profession, 60 to 100,000 people, that's not even touching the sides. In fact, the numbers were so low last year, the government didn't even bother measuring them. So, you know, that isn't a solution either. And, you know, I think this is one of these sort of big existential problem that needs disruption and really creative thinking. Sorry, I certainly don't have the answer. You know, I've looked. We created a business during lockdown called Socially Mobile, where we applied the exec education online business model to public relations management, and we're having some success at that. Challenges, you know, bringing that into a university environment and scaling it. But, you know, there are alternative models. It's whether the university context is the right place or is brave enough to take those on and adapt them.
Thank you so much. Back to Professor Tench.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well.
Sorry, yeah, I had a very strange frozen screen where I was pressing frantically my unmute button, but I think the computer, I'm afraid I've been working since early this morning. I think too many things are open. Yeah, thank you so far to Richard and Michael's contributions and the work you've done, the background work you've done on this already. I, like Stephen, we've been reflecting on this in conversations together a lot over the past few years, this very kind of thematic. And maybe I'm a bit more battle hardened than Stephen, so I'm slightly less depressed, but I'll also explain why, if you don't mind me adding to this debate and going back to the future. Because in fact, I've been looking at this problem probably since the first time I left practice and came into education and started studying it and writing papers. If you know, anyone can be bothered to go back, I was writing actually on this whole practice divide in the late 90s, and looking at even the work of the discussion that Richard's raised about what are graduate skills. There was a report written by Sir Ron Deering in 1997. He could have written it last week. It's the same thing, you know, intellectual skills, analytical skills, curiosity, all of these things, they're exactly what Deering was writing about, and we still aspire to deliver. And I actually think, sorry to double cite the conversation I had, which was a very nice reflection, talking to one of my former students, Don Birch, who's done very well in his career, as long as many others have. And he was citing those very points. That's what he drew from our degree courses even back then. So I think it has been, and it really is still a fascinating debate. And I pick up on Michael's point. I agree, probably with our aspiration as scholars to discuss the discipline, we are and have been a little bit remiss, I think, in being more critically analytical of what we do in terms of the pedagogy. But we have done some of that. And I think some of the work we've done in projects around competencies and the capability work that I know colleagues did with Anne and the colleagues did on that with the Global Alliance, but also the work we did a project around competencies, which is again trying to tackle and understand more deeply really what it is that we both need, but also what we can provide. And also with the European Monitor, we've been looking at this problem in terms of what does good look like, if you like, what's high performance in communications, and then how can we deconstruct that to know what it is that we perhaps put into our programs of study. But it is, and it has been a long-running debate. Back in 2004, I wrote a report with Joanna Fawkes based on research commissioned by the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, the Institute of Public Relations as it was then, so that's over 20 years ago, on, again, exactly this same thematic. And so you could be forgiven. I know Stephen's heard me say before now, I've sort of, felt like I've banged my head on this wall many, many times. But going back, as I've said, back to the future and picking up on Michael's point, I do still think there is room for optimism. Despite Richard's painting of a landscape which possibly is not only unique to the UK, we're in a particular position politically in higher education at the moment. I use that small p and large P politics, but there's a particular set of circumstances which are affecting the sector at this moment in time, which have been based on decisions around funding structures, funding models, decisions on whether we can or can't, supplement student incomes from different international locations, have had a huge impact economically. Now, what that means is all those things that have been described so far, that is actually affecting that commoditization that Richard talked about, critical. And I think is also the idea of competition. I think there is also for public relations particularly, the kind of slight elephant in the room is, despite the fact we had big growth at certain moments in time, and that was some of the points Richard's explained, perhaps why that happened. Again, I think the big challenge is, and we had it for years, that 16 and 17-year-olds are being asked to make a decision on university courses and for undergraduates. So they understand what economics is, they think. They think they understand what history is. They think they might understand what it is to study architecture, but they don't know what public relations is. And it's actually quite difficult for many of us as parents, if we haven't worked in that sector, to say, oh, I know what that is. And I think that is one of the fundamental problems. And this is where I'll be slightly controversial, which I'm not going to lay blame either at the sector or at the professional associations. But I do think we've had a bit of a problem in probably backing that explanation to the young population through our professional associations and the Chartered Institute. It's been slightly schizophrenic over its years that I've been involved with them, sometimes highly supportive, sometimes an actual competitor. When we first wrote the diploma program from Leeds, we wrote the original IPR diploma from Leeds, the certificate and the diploma, the content of that, which was then spread around the UK and then subsequently around the world. That then became the commodity the IPR got quite excited about. So it didn't mean to, but it ended up becoming a bit of an income stream, and then it became a way of training. And I think they kind of let the universities go a bit. And there's a bit of a history there that we could unpack. But so that's just a little contribution for me about this kind of appreciation of where we are and where we're going. And I think Stephen's right. We are probably ready for disruption, but universities are great places to also to be disruptive if they want to be, and be creative if they want to be. I mean, that's one of the reasons I probably stayed in higher education, because if you come up with a good idea and you put it in and it's going to perhaps make an impact, a lot of people say yes, very few people say no. Whether that's a program, a research project, bringing in external income, working with private sector. You know, I've so far had very few of my ideas where someone said, no, you can't do that, it's a rubbish idea. They'll go, no, try it, see what happens. So I think there's room for optimism is probably where I'd go. And I'll just pause there because I think I've probably said enough, and then chip in if we have more to say.
Thank you so much, Professor Tench. I would like to invite Monique to give us her thoughts as coordinator of EUPRERA network on PR education. Yeah. And then we'll close with some, hopefully, you know, optimistic thoughts and notes from this webinar.
Yeah, well, first of all, well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing a lot of insights, actually, regarding the PR education status in the UK. I'm the only one, apparently, who's not from the UK. So for me, for what I hear is very interesting. I'm from the Netherlands, and next to being the co-leader of the education network for EUPRERA, I work at Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. And so it's really interesting to hear what's actually happening in the UK when it comes to PR education. And so I've been writing down madly some notes that I think like, oh wow, I didn't know that, and also questions and things that I know that are different in the Netherlands. First of all, when it comes to the labeling of the programs, the PR. I don't think in the Netherlands we really have like PR programs. We talk about communication. We have communications, and that can be different from university to university. We also have like media studies. Yeah, we have different labels, but not that much really PR. So yeah. And that was also one of the questions that I had, and I think it was also mentioned during one of the reflections, was that if does it mean if the PR programs are being shut down that indeed PR education will flow away, or will there be any new degrees with a different name, perhaps more like media or communication, which will have these PR elements in those programs? And that's a bit how, well, it's organized in the Netherlands, I guess. And if that is the case, yeah, I'm just wondering, like, okay, is it a bad thing then that the PR the PR education disappears? And also what I also picked up from the conversation was well, there is a gap apparently between universities and practitioners. Indeed, how can we try to have the practitioners use all the research that we do, all those interesting new knowledge that well, that we come up with, and I was also thinking, like, because we are a University of Applied Sciences, we have more of them in the Netherlands, and one of the core things of these universities is that we do work a lot together. We collaborate a lot with practitioners, with agencies, with organizations, and also our research. We do applied research, so all research we do is linked to organizations. And that way, of course, we can make sure that the research we do is indeed being used, or not, well, not all of them, of course, but perhaps a bit more than the academic research. And well, in my role as the PR of EUPRERA, co-leader of the education network, what I really like by hearing all these well, different insights from UK, and when I compare it to how we organize things in the Netherlands, again, I think that this is why this network is so important, because we can learn from each other. I hear a lot of interesting things, and I think, oh wow, this can be some input for the education cafe that we're going to organize again during the press conference, and discuss this with each other. Is it something that you recognize, or is it different? How do you organize it? How can we help each other in yeah, coming up with ideas, or I don't know. So yeah, that's something that I really think is but one of the points that I take with me from this conversation. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Monique. A lot of again to take in. I think you had a question about, was that a question about the reconfiguration of UG degrees, right? So who would like to take that question? Maybe Mikhail, Professor Tench first, and maybe...
Well, I can say quickly, and then maybe Mikhail as well can add on. But no, from my perspective, that what's happening is, to give a bit more clarity, and I think it's been indicated that, like in the Netherlands and in lots of other countries, actually, the labeling is changing, and it's not that the teaching of the subject completely disappearing. I think you're getting combined honours, so you're getting with marketing or with media or with something else, but you're also getting it taught within it's still taught within programs of study, undergraduate programs of study, but are becoming more generic, the kind of debates that Richard started. The other thing is that, of course, like in other parts of Europe, and in fact in some parts of Europe, it's still maintained predominantly as a master's course, not as an undergraduate course. That's happened latterly rather than that's where it started. And I think we're going the other way around. We started more, although we did have a master's course, but there's a lot of undergraduates. But actually, it's the postgraduate students and the postgraduate courses. And back to what I said, at 16, 17, difficult to understand. When you've done a first degree and you're 21, 22, you might think, no, I get what I'd like to do. I'd like to work in Corp Com. I'd like to work in public relations. And that's something that we do see. And I think that's possibly one of the trends, if you could call it a trend. But there's still this challenge, I think, that we face from those things that have already been discussed around definition, identity, understanding, body of knowledge, agreement, all those things that we've said.
Yeah, everything is definitely interconnected. Mikhail, would you like to add something, or Stephen, Richard?
I can just briefly. Obviously, I fully agree with what Ralph has said. I think that what's maybe a bit more unique to the UK when compared to the rest of the Europe is the value of the bachelor's degree versus master's degree. Many students in the UK would like to finish on the bachelor's degree rather than pursue MSc or MA degree because those master's degree are considered more specialized, but also a stage before a continued PhD education. But also, I would say that one of the problems that I can see, I'm speaking for my research with Raluca about UK degrees naming, is that many of the newly formed degrees are kind of cherry picking those modules that seem fancy and attractive for students, like, media relations, content creation, social media. And the problem for me is that the very object of public relation is missed. So that we are building or educating students how to create content instead of them teaching them how to build relationships based on understanding, which kind of is a response also to what Stephen said. We have those challenges of misinformation. We have challenges of huge divisions, and teaching them generic skills only without more in-depth understanding why you need to create content, what kind of content may be used to divide, and what kind of content may be used to help people communicate. This may be missed if you cherry pick the most attractive bits of public education and mix them with journalism and media. Obviously, when you then add the MSc to that mix, then you would arrive at a more comprehensive understanding of the subject. But in the UK, I think it rarely happens, or is not as popular as in Europe, to continue your education until your master's degree.
Thank you, Mikhail. Some ending thoughts and maybe conclusions from Stephen and Richard as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think it's really, really good discussion. I'm reminded constantly of Bettica van Riemen, who talked of this divide between theory and practice, and I think we need to build stronger relationships between the two communities, to exactly the point Monique made. And that's what I'm doing through the remainder of my career. That's why I've gone back to school. That's why I'm studying a PhD. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, to Ralph's point, and we go around the houses on this, is there has to be some sort of rethink around the mode of teaching. You know, a 3-year degree in public relations clearly doesn't meet the requirement for the market. The market has rejected it for any number of reasons, and you know, some of those are related to how it's taught within higher education. Some of them are related to broader issues within the discipline, and I think that's where we've got to start this question about how how we look at new modes of education. Final thing is, and you know, I think we as a practice have to continue this push into management, away from the content and the publicity led perspectives of public relations, because frankly that completely devalues it. And then my final point is, you know, I've fallen in love with critical scholarship, and you know, Ralph, I'm not going to become a critical scholar at any time soon, but I recognize through, you know, I'm 3 years into a part-time PhD, I recognize the value that critical perspectives of public relations contribute to the body of knowledge and society in solving some of the big issues that we face from a societal perspective. So we have to find a place within universities for that type of research to consist, and teaching. And I don't know how that fits in. I'll leave that as an open question.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Richard, you said in the chat room, I think we can all agree on something. We don't necessarily need the public relations degrees, but the world does need public relations thinking. So would you like to add something to that?
Well, let me explain. Let me elaborate on that, because that's my final paradox. We don't need these undergraduate degrees. I'm not going to fight a battle over a war we've lost. The world needs public relations thinking. Let me give a case study on this. I don't mean you can see that. Alison Taylor, New York University, the best book on business purpose, broadly the ESG agenda, environmental social governance agenda. Stephen will like what I'm about to say. She's not an academic, a scholar, or even a past practitioner from our field. She's into governance and compliance, consultancy. But she has a lot to say about public relations. She has one mention of marketing in this whole book, and it's about purpose statements, and the word marketing is immediately followed by gimmick. That's her one mention. She has numerous mentions of public relations and stakeholder relationships and internal communications and the importance of employees in her book. She's not always positive about public relations. She thinks the negative reputation laundering side of it is difficult, but how do you solve those difficult, thorny, wicked problems around the environment, around social change, around corporate governance? You don't always need public relations as publicity. I agree with Stephen, but you need public relations thinking. And that's really a very positive note. That's the most positive note I can end on, because we're not going to end this educational thing. We may give up on BA degrees, but maybe that's the right thing, because what does an 18-year-old need to know about compliance and governance and ESG? But that really is the optimistic territory for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I would like to thank everybody and to kindly ask Anka to rejoin us and to end this webinar. But I would like to end this webinar with thank yous and really, really warm thanks for everybody's contributions and thoughts and notes. My key takeaway, or one of the key takeaways, of course, is the fact that we definitely have to strengthen the relationship with practice, with the industry, with stakeholders, and through meaningful consultations, or maybe other ways of collaborations. What you said, Monique, about applied knowledge and applied research, this is definitely something that is happening across the UK universities, with REF and being more focused on impact, definitely. So we have seen a trend in that as well. And to Professor Tench's point about CIPR or professional associations' responsibility in growing and acquiring more visibility towards the profession and expanding or contributing, let's say, to the propagation, if I could say this word, of the social value of public relations as a social science discipline. I think that those are my key takeaways from this webinar, but I'm sure that other people have many other ideas. But I wanted to thank everybody for the very substantial conversations. Anka, it's back to you.
Right, so thank you very much. That was quite interesting. It really shows the need for one of the projects that we are doing in the education network. We are starting in the education network, which is to map PR education in Europe, because some of the aspects that you mentioned are very, let's say, UK specific. They do not apply, for example, in other countries. For example, where I'm from Romania, we are very PR focused. Degrees do not disappear. They are there, then they are the main communication discipline. So it will be interesting when we start this project to see exactly what the dynamic is throughout Europe and what exactly, as Monique was saying, we can learn from each other and how can we support the advancement. But for sure, this was extremely useful, and I'm glad that we started this series focused on education. We certainly need these discussions, not just in close quarters, but going across the continent. So on behalf of EUPRERA and the Education Network, and I'm glad that Monique was there to represent us, thank you very much for this discussion, and I hope, sorry, that was my doggo. I hope that this will be the first of many, and it will certainly be useful to go more in depth into various topics that will emerge. So thank you very much to all.